Can we start? Já combinei. So, we are back for another panel, session 5. Session 5 is about sustainable seas, a deep dive into offshore multi-use. It will be led by Nuno Antunes from Miranda law firm. So we have in the panel Inês Machado from WavEC. We have Simon Johannes Stark from Dutch Marine Energy Center, William Cleverly from OWC, Ferdinando Giammichele from RWE, and we have Ben Oudman from DNV. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good afternoon, everybody. If you stick around with us for another hour, you get cake and a drink. So I hope you enjoy it. In any event, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very thankful to have been invited to moderate this panel. As Jeanette introduced me, I am from Miranda Associados. I am a partner co-heading the Energy and Natural Resources practice. I've been working in the energy field for over 20 years, starting with the offshore oil and gas, nowadays new energies, and I do mostly regulatory contracting and all of that. This is a very tight-led panel, so I'm going to have allocating time to my fellow panelists in a very short term. So each one of them has 1 minute to introduce themselves, starting with Inês. There you go.
Well, hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Inês Machado. I'm leading the environmental team and licensing in WavEC. And my background is marine ecology, and I've been dedicated to the assessment of impacts of offshore renewables in the sea.
Thank you, Inês.
All right.
Simon.
It was less than a minute, so maybe I've got 2 now.
No pressure.
My name is Simon Stark. I'm the CTO for the Dutch Marine Energy Center. We are a knowledge center and an accelerator for offshore renewable energy innovations, which means we work on a whole range of different technologies, all focusing around offshore renewable energies. My background is mechanical engineering, but now these days I work a lot on energy system models, which is also what I will tell you a little bit more about later.
Will, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Will Cleverly. I'm the CEO of OWC, a consultancy that help developers choose their sites, win their sites, and then develop their sites. And you'll hear more from me later.
Very good. Thank you. Ferdinando.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ferdinando Giammichele. I'm the consent manager for RWE in offshore wind, and I'm currently working on all the Mediterranean developments that RWE is looking to develop, including also Portugal.
Thank you. Ben.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Oudman. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm with DNV. I'm head of offshore wind for Southern Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Southern Europe is then the topic of discussion here today. DNV, global assurance and risk management company. I'll get to that later. And yes, I'm also an engineer, mechanical engineer in offshore technology.
Thank you so much. So this is a very good panel, all in less than 1 minute. So we're going to focus here on multi-uses of the offshore, whether it's possible or not, in which way, whether it has an implication on auctions, how. Someone called them non-price criteria. I think there's a price for everything, however we do it. But I'll leave it for my fellow panelists to jumpstart the conversation with some short presentations. Inês, you want to take the lead, please? Thank you.
So I'm giving this very big responsibility. So I presented myself. So I'm going immediately to our content. And just before we enter multi-uses, I want to give a little bit of a legal framework, which is the Net Zero Industry Act, proposed by the EU in March 2023, that establishes that member states have to establish public procurements based on best price-quality ratio, but also sustainability and resilience contribution. What are these contributions? They are criteria that have to be focused on environmental sustainability, innovation, contribution to the energy system integration, and also resilience. By this I mean the EU supply chain development. So these criteria have a weight set between 50 and 30, but they can be awarded higher weight. There are a few exemptions, but I have to cut on time. So in April 2024, the EU Commission is expected to implement some recommendations and guidances on standard elements for auctions in a way that they harmonize what is being implemented by the EU member states. So this brings us to multi-use solutions. How can they contribute to the sustainable contribution? For offshore wind auctions. They can provide environmental sustainability, innovation, and grid integration. The overall aim is to increase the sustainable use of the ocean and maximize benefits. And by this, they can be ecosystem enhancement, food production from low to high trophic levels, energy and storage. It is estimated that a minimum of 25% of the area of the wind farm park can be, offshore wind farm can be used for multi-uses. So starting from the beginning, nature enhancement. They can be based on different measures that mitigate impacts, going beyond what is already obliged in the EIA mitigation measures, so doing a little bit more, going farther. Ecosystem restorations, also measures that aim to assist the strengthening of the ecosystem by design. This is obviously very difficult. There are also nature-inclusive designs, add-ons or optimizations that can be used, but overall the aim is to maintain biodiversity or increase the benefits and also eventually do restoration. All these solutions differ in target species, integration level, and different methodologies, but overall they could also contribute to one of the new aims of the EU, which is the 30 by 30, but meaning that we should achieve 30% of marine protected areas by 2030. There are multiple concepts available. I'm not going to go through them, but there are also several challenges and considerations to be taken into account, such as the true effectiveness of these measures. There is a lot of need for research, monitoring data, and also scalability studies, but also decommissioning and removal. This is a concern also, even for fixed wind currently, because they are always looking at the aspect, so have we already built a new artificial reef in the area? Why is decommissioning obliging us to remove this? So this is also an important aspect to be tackled in the future. Multi-use for food production, another whole different world now. So there is currently no legislation to include food production in a wind farm because obviously there are food safety rules that will have to be taken into consideration. So overall, there is a gap here. So more time is needed to legislate this. There are obvious advantages of co-sharing space, infrastructures, very delicate subject, and also synergies in the operational phases. But in the other way, there is also high distance to ports, so increasing costs. Different types of cultivations we can think of: seaweed, shellfish, fish cultivation, and doing fishing activities in the area. Going very swiftly through this, because concerns with time. So we have seaweed aquaculture, which is the most advanced area and the most feasible one. Has a lot of needs, several outcomes. There are a few pilots successful on the North Sea, but I have a good news is that also in Portugal, we also have pilot projects being developed near Sines. So there are good results. Obviously, these are pilot scales. For shellfish, the demand is slightly different in terms of existing environment, but positive effects have been noticed. But again, there is also a lot of difficulties in going offshore here due to constructions, moorings, very important aspects if we go to offshore. This brings us to the very difficult aspect of doing fish aquaculture offshore. Mostly all open water fish farms are in sheltered locations, so this is quite difficult to combine these two activities, especially offshore. As for fishing, the use of passive fishing techniques has been widely proposed, debated, refused. This is very a topic of a lot of conflicts. I would say there are several risks, but there is also opportunities here and using these areas for specific dedicated fishing. However, experimental fishing research must be done before going ahead because even all the gears and equipments should be tested and revised before going ahead with this. There are different types of passive. There is a pilot study in Germany, again, North Sea, and it has been showing positive results. So multi-use, the integration of energy generation, conversion, and storage. Several challenges here, but also a few synergies. But I guess my colleagues will be more dedicated to this topic. There are integration challenges due to the intermittency of renewable sources of energy. There are also policy and governance, a lack of regulatory frameworks. Obviously, insurance complexity when combining these types of infrastructures, and also harmonizing of licensing procedures. But a few synergies can be thought of, and these are the promotion of enhancing all the technology material by also achieving decarbonization goals by joining different renewable energy sources, and also reducing supply variability. Obviously, the common argument is that there are also synergies for O&M, obviously, during the operation stage. In WavEC, we have been focusing in several EU R&D projects where we've been dedicated to different multi-use projects. The first one is EU SCORES project, where we look at the potential benefits of multi-source offshore renewables energy farms. The Aqua Wind project, where we integrate solutions of marine energy and fish aquaculture, and also Climarest project, where we look at restoration tools and different activities in Europe. So summarizing very quickly also, there are in all of these different sectors, they have different challenges and opportunities. It is important to acknowledge that the practical knowledge and experience, they are still lacking, so there is a lot to do here, which is also an opportunity, of course. And we have the North Sea experience, which can bring us a lot of information. However, these case studies are not directly applicable, since the environmental characteristics are completely different from our waters to the North Sea, where everything is more plain and easy, as we've been hearing the whole day. And currently, we're looking at roadmaps for multi-use applications, the mapping of national and international business partners, and looking at NYD solutions, or nature-inclusive solutions, for floating offshore wind in the Iberia. And that is me. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Inês, for setting the stage. Without further ado, Simon, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, first of all, a big thank you, of course, to WavEC, with whom we are working together on quite a lot of our projects, but also to the Dutch Embassy for organizing this. I think this came at a very nice moment to really tie together a lot of the learnings that we have from the North Sea. I'm just waiting for my slides here. Oh, there we go. All right. Let's start with a picture of something actually happening, something taking place. And with that picture, I want to give you two figures. First of all, is 40%. 40% is the capacity factor to which this asset, which is a quite expensive one, as Tenant will be happy to tell you, will be utilized at some point. Second of all, 80% 80% is the amount of cost increase that TenneT, the Dutch TSO, is currently forecasting for the future, for the coming years in terms of annual costs for energy infrastructure. So we know that we are investing a lot in infrastructure for these offshore wind projects. But at the same time, some of these assets, which cost really are the biggest cost drivers, one of the biggest cost drivers, are not really utilized to their fullest potential right now. And this is why I want to get your attention away from just this one wind turbine and focus a little bit on all the other things around it, on the logo here that you've been staring at all day, and talk a little bit about multi-use from an energy perspective as well. So when we talk about multi-use, actually we support a whole number of different innovations. On the one hand, we really talk about energy generation, which is floating wind, floating solar, wave energy, tidal energy, but also more exotic types such as salinity gradient or ocean thermal energy conversion. But also we have a look at offshore storage and power-to-X solutions, so really things happening before power ends up in the onshore grid, which is a quite crucial point actually if we talk about the stability and the capacity of the feed-in points and the grid in general as well. But everything we do is focusing on the design of a sustainable offshore energy system. So nature positive designs, nature protection, a lot of the things that Inês has already talked about just now play a very crucial role for us as well as solutions to be considered in these multi-use designs. So what is really the advantages? Why are we talking about multi-use as a sustainable option? Well, first of all, by combining different marine energy sources, you simply save space. You can produce more energy in the same amount of area, which, as you've heard, the North Sea is already a very, very busy area. Doing this is a very important step to enabling a future where we can produce more energy offshore without risking more conflicts with other stakeholders. But also the energy system integration, talking about the stability of an offshore grid, and not only a grid which is utilized to its fullest potential, but also actually a reliable grid that can ensure energy autonomy. It's very important. And lastly, of course, we want to make sure that we find the right hotspots in terms of sustainability, in terms of environmental impact, where we can make small reductions to actually have big impact in terms of the sustainability, critical materials, circularity, etc. of these projects. So this is all maybe a little bit abstract, so let's talk about something concrete, something that Inês has already introduced, and that's the EU SCORES project. In the EU SCORES project, we're focusing on two technologies. We're focusing on wave energy, first of all, integrated with floating offshore wind farms, and there is a demonstrator right now, a buoy of Core Power Ocean in Viana do Castelo installed for a couple of weeks already, and there will be 3 more following as well. So this will be one of the first wave arrays operating, and floating solar energy. So both of these are focusing on increasing the use of space for energy production, but they're also very important because they're demonstrator projects, and demonstrators mean that we have a chance to learn, right? And if nothing goes wrong, it probably means we haven't learned anything. So demonstrators come with a certain risk. We've heard a lot about that today, and maybe also the risk averseness in an already risky industry, but they're very important to unlock actually this potential for the future. And what this potential is something that we are focusing on quite a lot in terms of energy system studies. So what we do is we do combinations of different sources in one park and have a look at how we can utilize the grid to a higher extent. How can we quantify basically the advantages of multi-use? And this is an example of that. So I just want you to focus first of all on the blue lines, which draw a little bit of a grim picture. This is basically showing you how often does a certain event occur of a certain length, where there is less than 20% of energy production from an offshore park. This is an example in the Netherlands right now. You've learned a lot about Dutch offshore wind parks today, so but I will still not quiz you on which one you see here. It's one of the northern ones, to north van de Waddeneilanden. But basically what you can see here is we manage to reduce the periods where there is very little to no power production from really long periods in some cases, over a five-year overall period, to really much shorter periods of only 2 to 3 days. So by combining more sources, the energy reliability, the autonomy, providing continuous energy output, basically baseload power, is increased drastically. And this is not only something we do for an academic purpose. It's not something that just happens for us in a research perspective. It's something that is already taking place in the Netherlands right now. And also on the risk of, again, jumping on the bandwagon of praising how everything in the North Sea is going so smoothly, just also to the Dutch fraction, there's a lot more things that we can do to increase this. But this is just giving you a very quick overview of the different wind parks in the Netherlands right now, where there's already multi-use happening, where multi-use is already being enabled by certain policies. So in the south there, we see Borsele with the number 1, which is a wind park where there is certain areas designated for multi-use, which are basically free for every applicant to use. But also in a lot of these other wind parks, Hollandse Kust West, for example, we will see 5 megawatts of floating solar installed, and IJmuiden, we heard it today as well, there will be even more, there will be 50 megawatts of floating solar installed there. So these are small demonstrator projects which go a long way to actually de-risk these technologies and pave the way for the future, where we can make more sustainable use of the same offshore space. And the little map here is just showing you, first of all, one of our projects where we are actually going to work together with RWE and the Dutch floating solar developer on doing all the research, also together with WavEC, on integrating floating solar in wind parks. So this is focusing a lot on the risk issues that we've discussed today. But also this is a map of all the countries where we've so far had requests to help them model and understand where we can implement multi-use effectively to model different parks, and this is interest actually from project developers. So we're very happy to take this further and looking forward to a discussion.
Thank you, Simon. Just a word of caution about this presentation. All of those parks in the Netherlands, and before you get all excited, are bottom fixed. So it's an entirely different ballgame, just to calm down the expectations. Please, Will, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for having me today. I'm going to be very quick. I've got 3 topics, and I'm going to do it in 3 minutes, because I stand between you and a well-deserved drink at the end of the day. So very briefly on OWC and why I have the credibility to stand up here and talk to you about multi-use seabed. The benefits of multi-use seabed, I think, will be well covered, have been well covered already by my fellow panelists. So I'm going to play the bad cop here. I'm going to talk about the challenges. I'm going to talk about why maybe here and now, here in Portugal, and now in this first auction, multi-use seabed is perhaps not the best idea. So who are we? So OWC, we're a consultancy. We've worked on a lot of floating wind projects around the world, about 50, all at fairly early stage. And we have about 300 people who help our clients, the developers, choose their sites, win their sites, and then develop their sites. And we were active in 16 countries. We're now active in 17 countries because we have a fantastic relationship with Marco. This is Marco and I on another sunny day in Portugal, concluding our negotiations and finalizing our exclusive relationship here. It's great to be working with you, Marco, and all at WavEC. So, very briefly, benefits of multi-use. I think reflecting on what's happening over in Dubai at COP is important, and we all want to hit this 1.5 degree pathway. That needs 2,000 gigawatts of offshore wind. That's a lot of space to be taken up, and we shouldn't be selfish with that space, and we should be sharing it. That space can be shared to enhance the power, to harness that power, to produce other products. And theoretically, the revenue can go up, and the cost can go down if you have multi-use of your seabed. But we've looked at it in some detail, looking at layouts of offshore wind farms that exist around the world, and importantly, looking at how much of that space is really left once you put buffers around various infrastructure elements. And of course, that's your turbine. That's the most important one, that you need a large buffer around, and your offshore substation if you have one of those. You also need a buffer around your inter-array cable and your mooring. You can't see those at the surface, but they're underneath. You need a decent buffer, not just around where they are, but also where they might be in the future. So if your inter-array cable fails, you dig it up, you move it tens of meters, and you bury it again. If fails again, you move it again. So there's a large buffer around where your inter-array cable is and could be. Same with the mooring lines. If your anchor fails, it's a large operation with expensive anchor handlers replacing it. You don't want any infrastructure in the way of that. In terms of O&M, for each turbine, you need to have safe and clear access from 2 different directions. And worst case scenario, if there's a major component exchange required, you need to be able to tow this out as quickly as possible. You need to be able to have a very clear line of sight from where you are to the port, and no infrastructure in the way should slow that down for health and safety reasons and for cost reasons. I kindly borrowed this photo from my friend Aaron. Thank you very much. And from it, I did a very detailed engineering analysis of the distance between these 2 tugs, and it's about 400 meters. That's a large distance to have as a pathway through your wind farm from any single turbine back to port. The space that's left, once you put all those buffers in place, is between 25 and 40%. So it's very interesting to see, Inês, you came to exactly the same conclusion, that 25% is sort of the minimum, and it can go up a little from there. And it doesn't seem a lot. It is a lot, if you bear in mind that these wind farms are hundreds of square kilometers. But my provocation, the point that I'll be raising now and later in the questions, is the additional revenue and the potential additional reduction in cost that you get for this multi-use. Is it worth it in terms of the cost and the risk and the insurance premium at the early stages of a wind farm development, when it's already very complicated to be building 2 to 10 gigawatts of floating wind farm in a new country with a new supply chain? Do you want to be throwing on an additional challenge? So I'll leave it there and look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. And you are all starting to understand why I said that there is a price for everything. The question that Will just left there, cost, risk, insurance premium. Ferdinando, no, is it you? Oh, yeah, it is you, sorry. We changed the presentations, you're right.
Thank you. So my focus will be on how you make sure to add value to your projects in terms of community engagement and stakeholder engagement as well, and making sure that your project delivers a bit of reaches those targets regarding the sustainability and the environmental protection. But first, I would like just to make a brief introduction on RWE. We are one of the world-leading renewable energy companies. We are second worldwide for offshore wind development, and we are also have several developments in the US for solar and wind, and in the UK as well. And we have been operating since the early 2000s in the renewables, and actually we are this year it's our 125th anniversary in the energy sector. And especially in offshore, we are quite strong for our current asset in operation are more than 3 gigawatts, all of them in Northern Europe. And we have a strong pipeline for offshore wind, which is basically secured rights in part of Northern Europe, America, including California and South Korea as well. And also, as part of our continuous research and development activities, we are looking into floating wind as the next big step for us. And we think that floating wind has a big potential for opening new markets. And we are also quite active into research and development. And in the demonstration project, we have teamed up with other partners on the TetraSpar demonstrator and the Demosat nearby here in Spain, which went online in September this year. And we are starting to make sure that floating wind becomes a reality, because we We are actively getting all the securing rights for floating wind in countries like California, and also we have been pre-qualified to bid in France, Norway, and we are looking to take part in the Celtic Sea auction round 5 in the UK. And this is the heart of my presentation, because I would like to stress what is really important to make sure that you bring value to your projects in terms of sustainability, community engagement, and also environmental protection or remediation, as well as making sure that you provide some education and skills to the communities where your projects are, basically. And we've, as I said at the start, we have had quite an experience in 20 years, especially in the UK, where all the examples I will talk about are. And so basically, I will focus on 3 key learnings on how to make sure that you add value to a project. First, with the stakeholder engagement, that has to be meaningful and inclusive as possible. You need to share knowledge, your knowledge of the project with the stakeholders, and make sure that they are involved from the early stage in the project development. And then you will need to provide some support to the local communities and make sure that they are provided with tools, even funds or financial commitment, to make sure that they can deliver a sustainable development of their own communities themselves. The first example is what we did in the UK with a project called Rampion, which is in the southern part of the UK coast, near the town of Brighton, around 10 kilometers from the coast, so quite visible from the coast itself. And we started an early engagement activity with the fisheries, and since the early start of the project development. So we had some specific roadshow and events to talk about the project and present them how we were going to make sure that the construction was taken forward. And also we sat down with the commercial fisheries at the local level and also the national level to implement a code of conduct for construction. And also we've been participating with the National Fishery Association to develop specific guidelines on how to make sure that compensation was taken into account. And also, this has reflected also on a national or on other projects as well. We did the same thing in Poland with some project in the Baltic Sea, where we also added some reskilling program and actions to make sure that the fishermen there could get some training on how to be able to work in offshore wind as well, and so to give them like another opportunity to be able to continue a life locally and contribute to their own community. And also we implemented a particular community benefit fund for the Gwyntimore offshore wind farm in the Irish Sea. And this fund is a commitment of around £20 million for over 25 years. And which will also include also the other commitments with the nearby projects in the area, near North Oil and Real Flats. And this fund will help developing sustainably the communities in North Wales, which is a very deprived area of the UK, where these funds can make quite a big help to make sure that these communities are managed to develop themselves and improve their own facilities. Like for instance, in a town called Llandudno, they've made some. Our funds made sure that their pier was improved. Or also we provided some protective equipment for the rescue service, the local rescue service boats. And also our fund made sure that a port of Real, which is the major town on the coastline, had some refurbishment, and their facilities were also refurbished as well, with some specialist vessel added as well. And on the topic of the stakeholder engagement, we are very keen to make sure that all stakeholders, both statutory and non-statutory, are involved from the early stages. And a couple of months ago, we organized like a deep dive event in Norway and brought some 200 stakeholders from 7 countries, all of them where we have our projects of interest, including Portuguese stakeholder. And we took them to Stavanger in Norway to visit our TetraSpar demonstration site. And also we had some interactive sessions and workshops to make sure that we could exchange knowledge and share best practice and lessons learned between different types of stakeholders like local authorities, the supply chain, the government agencies, and also the community representatives from Korea, the US, I mentioned Portugal as well, and Greece. So it was quite an interesting event. And we are also organizing one next year nearby. I cannot tell you more, but in the coming weeks, we will be sending out invitation to all stakeholders to make sure that also more and more people are involved and we can share best practice and lessons learned together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ferdinando. Ben, please. Wrap up and tell us what's happening worldwide.
Thank you. Just wait for my slide. So indeed, no, I really will be between the drinks and
Yeah.
a well-deserved thing at the end of a long day. Without further ado, so quickly about who we are, DNV. So I know this is a partly WavEC, partly Dutch embassy thing. The N in DNV stands for Norway, not for Netherlands, just to take away that one. We are a global company, 160 years old nearly, and have been in the maritime space, or the shipping space for that time, have been in the offshore space for about 70 years, in the electricity space for about 100 years. So we sort of know what we do in this area, and basically we call ourselves an assurance and risk management company. And we have been part of the offshore wind industry and also the floating offshore wind industry for quite a long time, actually from the very beginning. And some of the rules that we write and the things that we do are the most used in the industry. Some of the things I'm going to show here are a little bit taking you a global view. So zoom back out. Many project examples were given by my colleague here. I want to zoom back out. And I do that on the back of some publications that we do, and if you want to read more, there's the address to find them. The main flagship is the Energy Transition Outlook that we publish every year, now for 7 years in a row. And that work, that's a bit of research that we do, is a forecast how we think the energy transition will unfold and how it will evolve in various places, including the ocean space. Doing such research allows us to do spin-off publications like the one here, Ocean's Future to 2050, which really talks about the blue economy until 2050, but also more focused in how will the floating offshore industry look like in the next 5 years. And some of the graphs you'll see now are based on these publications. So we will see a huge shift in the energy system towards 2050. Will already showed you a slide as to what we expect there to be in terms of floating wind. This is a graph on your right, is all the world's grid-connected electricity generation by power type, and anything from the dark blue upwards, or the green actually upwards, is renewables. And you can see this huge shift we're going to make out of fossil into renewables. And the big part that wind will play in it, and more specifically offshore wind and floating offshore wind, which seems to be a very small sliver of a line, 2%. Of that grid-connected electricity generation will be floating wind. That is still taking about an average of 50 megawatt per turbine, 20,000 units to be deployed between now and 2050. And you saw from the size, from the slide that will show you how big these things are. So it's 20,000 of those things, and it's actually bigger than those, will have to be deployed. That's a huge industry undertaking. That is going to hit the ocean. But it's not the only thing that's going to hit the ocean, but it's a big part of what's going to hit the ocean, because the demand for ocean space in that same time will increase 9-fold. The light blue here is offshore wind, right? You actually see offshore oil and gas is still there, but it will decline. And aquaculture will be on the rise, as was shown also by Inês to start with. And also alga culture is mentioned here, right? So there is going to be what we call a race for ocean space. And then multi-use seabed is the inevitable direction for policymakers to take. Because there's only so much space we have, we might as well make the most out of it, whilst conserving what needs to be conserved. I think that's the main message that we all agree to. But it's a long-term perspective. So how do we balance the long term with the short term is the question I ask myself. And then I say, okay, here's floating offshore wind. And some may think, you know, we do offshore, we know how that works, it's proven to be great. The Dutch are boyish about 70% reductions LCOE, but that's all bottom fixed, right? And floating is not just sticking some known turbine on some known oil and gas asset like a floater. It is quite something else. And luckily, in the previous channel, we had, I call him Dr. No now, on the risk side, showing you all the things that can go wrong in such a project. And it's not that I want to be negative, I'm actually very positive, but these projects are challenging. And in Portugal, you need to get them off the ground first, before you start to think around all the things you could also do with these projects. There were many questions in the audience today about how will the cost of wind evolve and how competitive is floating wind, so I did bring the chart. So here you see basically that it needs to scale. The dark line is floating offshore wind, right? And it sits at a price point in 2030, so that's not today, around $150 per megawatt hour. And we think it can come down to below 75 somewhere in the 2040s, based on that same energy transition outlook. To get there, it needs to scale, right? And it needs to scale before you get there. So governments need to think about, how do I manage, how do I organize, how do I orchestrate a system whereby we get through that curve, as we did in bottom fixed and as we did in onshore, in the best possible way. Now, one of the main key drivers in this, and we had a bank in the previous session here as well, is that renewable projects, offshore wind in particular, are predominantly project finance. And this is a short graph from Wind Europe showing all the projects between 2013 and 2022 in the green that were project finance, and the other ones were corporate finance. And clearly 75% is project finance. That means the banks have a say. And they don't like additional, in brackets, risks. I mean, insurance companies might be worse, but banks are equally conservative, and it was already echoed here by our colleague in the previous panel. They want their loan back, they want all the risks covered, they want strong track records, they want to have all the contracting difficulties solved, right? And they want stable, forecastable project cash flows, right? Preferably supported by some sort of mechanism that will ensure those cash flows for quite a long time. If you want to get that right first, then we can start thinking about all the other nice things we need to add to our projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Okay, these presentations took a bit longer than I expected, but they are interesting, so I thought you should have the information and not interrupt the speakers. Thank you, all of you. I'll give you time to muse over what they said until now, to think about questions. I'm going to have one round of questions around the room, and then get immediately back to the audience. So, Inês, starting with you. You have just heard Ben. My question to you is, going back to your presentation, and looking, for example, at the large wind farms auctions in the mid-2000s in Portugal, where you had, let's call them, for the lack of a better word, non-price criteria, like jobs creation, investment in industries, contributions for funds. Do you still believe that we should have those criteria and that they are feasible for the floating offshore wind context, so to speak? 1 minute.
1 minute, so very quickly. Yes, I think they do. There are different ways of doing this, different ways of applying non-price criteria. And I guess, I also believe strongly that the industry has to provide its contribution to the environmental, social, and supply chain improvement. So even though we can foresee different types of non-price criteria through innovation and through environmental mitigation and environmental promotion that should definitely make part of these projects. They can be obviously not simultaneously offshore being installed in the same area, which increases risks that we already been hearing of, but can be pilot projects, development of technologies that still need to be tested preliminarily. As we've been seeing for algae aquaculture, pilots have to be tested before going offshore. But there are other ways of doing environmental improvements of the project, investing in additional mitigation measures, monitoring, effective environmental monitoring that really tackles the knowledge gaps that we have on our sea, especially the offshore areas that we completely lack knowledge of and of the existing environment. So I think there is a large number of things that could be incorporated that would provide benefits for the society overall while going ahead with the floating offshore wind.
Very quick question. Do you believe that can be made without increasing costs?
I think obviously it is associated with an increase in costs, but there is, these non-price criteria are limited or let's say capped until 10%. If the developer, and this is what is stated in the EU proposed law, is that until 10% the developer has to include non-price criteria. If this investment is higher, then there is an exemption. But I believe that until 10% there is a lot that can be done. Yeah.
Thank you. Simon, looking at one of the specific multi-uses energy, let's focus on energy other than the floating offshore wind. I mean, it's possible, we know in the North Sea. We have had that in bottom-fixed projects. With the areas that we'll mention, with the uncertainty around those areas, can we still work with, for example, floating solar, wave energy? Can we work with BESS, battery storage, in the bottom or in the infrastructure? Can we do it? If so, how? 1 minute, two, please.
All right. Well, let's start with can we do it? Yes. I think it's a very simple answer. The question is when we can do it, because of course no one is suggesting taking something as risky as a floating wind project and turning it into a test bed for all types of new innovations and throwing stuff in there that no one has ever seen offshore before, right? This is what we have test sites for. This is what Portugal also has very good test sites for in the north as well. The question is, I think, what is the best fit for different technologies? And if we look at floating solar and wave energy particularly, we do see very naturally already where these developers go right now to demonstrate the business cases and the technologies. Floating solar we see primarily around the Mediterranean, but also in the North Sea. And wave energy we see particularly around Ireland, around the Portuguese coast, but also further south around Gran Canaria, for example. We have much more exposure to the Atlantic as well, which plays a very important role, especially when you look at the offset between the energy production of wind and wave energy, right? You can have wave energy still coming in long after a weather system has disappeared, so to say. You still have continuous wave power coming in while the wind turbines are not operating. So I think it is possible. It's definitely something that has to be considered, if only for the sake of the energy system overall. And the question there really is, where and how do you integrate that in the wind park? And just to give an example of floating solar, we've heard a little bit about the space constraints, which are very real, and which is something we also recognize. We figure for a bottom-fixed wind park, but let's just talk about that in terms of the space constraints right now. If we utilize the entire space that we can within basically an area of 4 wind turbines, already taking into account 500-meter corridors to get to each wind turbines from 2 directions, everything, we can install 5 times the capacity of floating solar in a wind park as the actual wind power. So that means, actually, if we only utilize 20% of this space, and we came to the figure of 25 to 40% for floating solar only, if we only utilize 20%, we roughly get to an installed capacity match between wind and solar energy. And this is pretty much where we've seen for a few of our models already the sweet spot as well, where they're pretty much complementary and not one of them again starts dominating the system and you again have the issue of intermittency on the grid. So I think it's very much possible in terms of which technology fits. Floating solar definitely won't appear in Portugal as a first market. I think there's a lot to be learned in more sheltered waters, first of all, but I wouldn't rule it out for the future.
Okay, thank you. Will, I'm interested in the answer to your question, to the question you asked at the end. What do you think it's going to happen? And can we afford to have a failure in the first auction because of the issues you raised and you asked the question? So my question to you is, can you answer that question and tell us what are the implications if there is a failure in the first auction because of that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, if there's a failure in the first auction for any reason, multi-use seabed or any other criteria, it would be a disaster for the Portuguese offshore wind industry, for the floating offshore wind industry, for the floating solar industry. So everything we've been speaking about today, I think, is ensuring that those risks are as low as possible. I think it's been really interesting how you two have both answered the question, and you've answered it quite differently, and I think that's because the wording at the moment from the government is very loose. It just implies that some sort of multi-use of seabed is necessary. Now, if that's first auction, as soon as possible, you need floating solar in the middle of your wind park, that's a problem. If it's in the third auction, you need to invest in R&D or you need to invest in a different demonstrator project somewhere else, then absolutely, that's a really good idea. So the message I wanted to give today is that multi-use of seabed is the future and will happen, but we can't risk it on a major scale on the first floating offshore wind farm auction in a new country. It's just too risky and could kill it.
Thank you, Will. Ferdinando, looking at the examples you gave about how you can promote sustainability in its various ways, socially, environmentally, having looked at the Portuguese market, and we all know where RWE has been looking at the Portuguese market, how would you approach the Portuguese market in that respect specifically? What would be some ideas that could be taken in that respect?
I've been reading the strategic environmental assessment and the PAR document in the last couple of weeks in Portuguese, which was quite challenging, but for Italian people it's fine. I mean, it's not Turkish, but it's all right to understand that. And I have seen that the Portuguese government has done quite a lot of good work in engaging early with the stakeholders, especially the fishermen. And I've read anyway that some of the comments were not very positive about the way they were consulted, but it is encouraging to see that the early engagement with the stakeholders has happened. And perhaps I would have liked to see a bit more engagement with something that is often overlooked, like for instance the Ministry of Defense and the aviation. And I've seen the same thing, Nuno, in Greece a couple of weeks ago, because in Greece they published the same areas for offshore wind development, and there was the same, lack of engagement with the Ministry of Defense and the aviation. And I've been working in the UK, and if there is no understanding of what the restriction could be on offshore wind farm because of problems with the radar, defense radar or aviation radar, this could be quite a big problem for further development, because if you need a new radar, these radars will need to be tested, and it will have consequences on the construction and operation of the wind farm. So you need to also, in this way, I would encourage perhaps, I don't know, APREN, the Renewable Energy Association, to start this engagement, to create like a working group and sit down with the relevant stakeholders, fishermen or Ministry of Defense, the civil aviation authorities, and try to put on the table what are the key issues there.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, the issue of the radars is not just for defense purposes, it's also for marine traffic management. We have the key areas on which the radars are focusing, and I think that until now the plots are all The lots that are going to be awarded are all out of those critical areas, but that's a point to take. Now, my question to you, Ben, just to wrap up and turn to the audience, have we seen this implemented in the world somewhere? And how did that work? So in other words, are we completely in uncharted waters, or are there examples on which the Portuguese government can rely for devising its own auction strategy?
I think your question is particular to floating offshore.
To floating.
Because you've seen the examples of
Yes,
bottom fixed.
yes.
And the answer is no. I mean, we have 120, megawatts installed globally in some pilots here and there, and their main concern was not making these type of things happen. They were on make it happen.
So what do you think if the government would go ahead with that,
So I'll start different. So DNV's purpose is to safeguard life, property, and environment. So I'm very much with them on their cause when it comes to designs that enable a better outcome for the environment, are no-regret options that you can push developers to take and engineering companies to think about.
That's a different issue.
That's a very different issue. I think we
that's
can
impact mitigation.
We can all be there. That's a good thing to do.
Yes.
Right. The other one is the interesting where the example of the insurance companies was one about lack of track record. And how do you solve this conundrum of people being conservative yet needing to be innovative? That is a huge conundrum to solve. And sandboxing is some of the examples that were used. You could use in the mechanism to some degree some sandboxing, but you've got to ring fence them extremely tightly, right? And say that's only for that purpose, and that's how much your share will be, in order for the rest of the project to go off its own merry way, in order to make that a success. Because that is indeed also my reflection. The first one needs to get right. You need to get it right. You need to build the confidence that this is an investable place, both as a country and as a technology, and go from there.
Thank you so much. So you have a round of questions. I have a list. I can go on and on and on, but it would be preferable if the audience would jump in and ask questions that they may have. Any questions? António Vidigal, here please, down, third row. Thank you.
It's a very fast one. Multi-use, of course, is fantastic. One question I would like to put, does it make sense to start testing fish farming? I think it would be a huge value, a way of making compatible or aligning interests, making win-win between fishermen and the parks. For me, it would tend to be a priority, but what is your opinion?
Inês, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start. So there are a few pilots. We're actually collaborating in one project that is doing that off Canary Islands in a test site, which is Ploquin. And this is a project that is looking to those aspects with a floating wind turbine and an aquaculture. It is very challenging because obviously we're looking at areas where they're very near the coast. There is nearby O&M infrastructures. So if we think about it that way and near the shore area, I think it's quite possible. But as you go offshore and the existing environment is completely harsher and much more difficult to overcome, at this moment, it's very premature to think about it. Simpler solutions would be the ones that we would advise the industry to pursue.
Will, do you want to kind of talk about what would be the financial implications of running a test such as this in a project? Is it feasible? What percentage of CapEx would it be involved? Do you have any ideas about that?
Obviously, it depends on the size of the fish farm as to the size of the capex. But I think it's true that in all scenarios that the capex goes up, and what that means in Portugal would mean that either the rate of the cost of electricity would go up for the ratepayers, or you'd have a no bid auction like we had in the UK. both of which I think are bad scenarios for the first offshore wind farm in Portugal. So it's very much on the list of things we should be considering, but I reiterate the point, not on the first auction, because I think it would be politically dangerous.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? Over there, please.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes? Okay. This is a question, sorry, is it for you? Oh, okay. Thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Philip Belitsky, and this is, I guess, primarily for Simon. Can you please comment on floating offshore solar in the North Sea specifically? As we all know, the North Sea is not known for its sunshine and it's known for its harsh weather. So can you make a comment as to the feasibility of eventual commercial venture of such a type with, I guess, what would be very low capacity factors, especially in the winter season? Thank you.
Yeah. No, very happy to comment on that. The North Sea, indeed, is not always sunshine. It's not too well known for that. On the other hand, I think what really goes to show that it's feasible is the track record that we've already started building in the North Sea. There's a couple of demonstrators, one particularly that has been out for the last 2 years nearly at this point. And if you just all think back for the last 6 to 8 weeks, there was quite a few considerable storms included there as well, which also hit the Netherlands. So in terms of survivability in that environment, there's really very little concerns. Of course, there's always the questions about the long-term survivability, right? So it's not only about the structures, but also about the panels themselves, which have to be answered. For that reason, there is different concepts. And also in terms of the efficiency and the long-term productivity, they do differ considerably because we've got some panels which are really just built to sit right on the water surface. So basically have very little material being used for their own structure, and some panels which really look much more like what we see for floaters of offshore wind turbines as well, semi-submersibles, 6 to 7 meters above the water, pretty much outside of continuous contact at least with the water. So we will see differences there. It's really hard to say at this point where exactly the efficiency differences are and the benefits are also in terms of salt deposits or other things that can end up on these panels. But from what we have seen actually is that this complementarity, especially in the wind parks, does make a lot of sense, especially because of these seasonal differences. Because in the end, what we looked at is modeling parks which combine floating solar and wind turbines and minimizing curtailment without actually increasing the export capacity, the export cable capacity. So that floating solar does produce less in winter is actually an advantage because that's typically when the wind turbines run over hours, right? So this overall plays together quite well and is also reflected in the government targets in the Netherlands, where we have a 3 gigawatt target until 2030 for floating offshore.
So you're quite confident that the decreased power production from the floating solar can be offset by the increased production in the summer. The decrease in the winter can be offset by the summer, and that can play complementary role to exactly the opposite in the case of offshore wind. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's not something we're confident about. It's something we know simply also from what we've modeled so far.
So you think, yeah. Sorry. So you think there can be let's say, an unsubsidized future for commercial floating solar in the Netherlands? Is that correct?
Just looking over to the Dutch corner again, not right away. No, I think same as every other offshore industry. We've heard a lot about floating solar today, floating wind on that today. There's going to be a cost reduction curve. There's going to be a learning curve involved. One big part for floating solar is depending on how you look at it. The maintenance will be many factors easier than for wind turbines. So the OPEX will be much lower for sure. So this can play a very crucial role actually in the cost reduction. At the same time, you can also think about what do you actually want to do with the single panel when it breaks? You can simply leave it on the structure and not worry about it rather than replace it. So you've got a lot more modularity in the floating solar structures, which can play a very big role there in the feasibility as well. And yeah, as you said, the feasibility in terms of energy production profile is something that works very well with offshore wind.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, okay. My name is Pedro Vinagre from WavEC, so I have a very generalistic question for the panel. And we have been discussing here the implementation of multi-use projects, and I want to take a big leap and talk about decommissioning. So many times the environmental monitoring plans in the scope of environmental impact assessment regard activities from pre-construction to decommissioning, and then forget about post-decommissioning. Many times the developers, they stop their monitoring programs, and well, after decommissioning, no one knows what happens. So in terms of moving to a multi-use of the space, how do you think this post-decommissioning monitoring could be developed? Who would be responsible for it, for example?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to divide your question in two. I'm going to ask Ferdinando from from the environmental part of the decommissioning, and I'm going to ask Ben to talk about the financial part of decommissioning, being fully aware that decommissioning of floating offshore wind is a very long, far away situation. Yeah. Please, Ferdinando, can you start with the environmental part?
Looking at the environmental part of things, it will have to be discussed with the regulators, and the regulators will need to take like a form view on who will be the responsible for doing the post-decommissioning monitoring, if it's going to be necessary and for how long. So it's going to be something that we cannot ascertain now, because it's
should it be in the very initial regulation, the responsibility for the decommissioning? Should that be something to be resolved in the future, or should it be immediately done?
I mean, it's good that it's in the early regulation, and even the developer are consulted, and they give their views on that together with the government authorities. So
thank you. Ben, can you look at the other side, financing it, and how should it go in your experience?
Well, the experience...
We know how it goes in the oil and gas. It's easy.
That's what I'm going to say. I mean, everybody knows that many governments' balance sheet is actually heavily weighed down by the upcoming decommissioning costs of all these oil and gas assets in the North Sea as well. Yeah. Of which they own at least 40% often. So that really is also the auction design partly. So how do you regulate? How do you oversee? That will definitely need to be part of it. It is sizable cost. Perhaps floating is maybe more attractive here. I'm not sure. I mean, getting a monopile out is not easy either. Yeah. So maybe there floating has an advantage. Getting anchors out can be easy. Can also be quite hard, by the way. But still, it really depends on the design of your floating wind park. But doesn't necessarily need to be a disadvantage to be floating in this case, at least.
Yeah. Thank you. One final question from the audience. Otherwise, we will wrap up here. There is someone there, please. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry, maybe just to set the hair amongst the pigeons with the question around multi-use. Do you think we actually have a choice? And the reason I say that is I think offshore wind now has gone past being seen as, let's say, the innovative new guys on the block who are trying to get down the cost curve. Now they're seen as very successful industry, at least in Northern Europe, and they've got to pay their way. And I think that you're seeing that more and more in community groups, and fishermen and other stakeholders are starting to throw their weight around, especially in new markets. And we had a project in Canada, a tidal project actually, that got killed basically because of disinformation spread by fishermen and their ability to influence the regulator against any scientific knowledge. So I think if we don't do something to engage with other stakeholders, like fishermen, to get them reskilled, retrained, doing other things out there in the environment around the fishermen, around the wind farms, and actually tangibly demonstrate that, could be sandboxing, I don't think you'll get projects away at all.
Okay, thank you. That's actually a very good question, which I'm going to do this way. I want a yes or no answer from each one of you, but focusing on the floating offshore wind that Portugal is trying to get up started. Okay, so forget about the other offshore wind, bottom fixed, focus on floating offshore wind. Do you agree or do you disagree with the gentleman as to we don't have an option, if we don't do it, the project is not off the ground? Inês, do you agree or disagree?
I would tend to agree. I
Okay.
hope I'm able to agree.
I agree.
Simon?
Yeah, I
Agree.
agree. Yeah.
I agree.
3,
I do agree.
4,
I agree, there are more fishermen voting than developers. Yeah.
5, and there you have your answer. You're absolutely right. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you so much for respecting the time. So now we are going to the last session. It's about our anniversary, 20 years anniversary. It's okay. It's okay. I will speak about something. So at the end, after the speakers, I invite you to go to the catering area. We have a cake and something to drink. And there's also a booth. It's a photo booth. You can take a picture of yourself, you know, saying that you were here at the WavEC seminar. And there's also a telephone, and you can leave a message for the WavEC team. Say something that you want, and we will listen to it afterwards. Okay? So I'm going to ask Marco to come on stage and say some words, some final words.
Well, we are almost reaching the end, and it's not an easy task to summarize all the discussions in a few words. But some of the key messages that I took is basically that 10 gigas is a very ambitious plan, but possible. Stability is critical for investors to invest and the industry to start and evolve. So stability is a critical word here. And to trigger the path to reach the 10 gigas, a clear and transparent framework for project approval, for licensing and connection is also key. And of course, in this, another message, in this entire process, ports are critical, absolutely critical. It's a very important part of this process. And really, before closing this annual seminar, that was quite impressive, at least from my point of view, filled with engaging and insightful discussions. I want to express my sincere gratitude to our invaluable sponsors, esteemed speakers, and all participants who were essentially to the success of this event. Your support and active participation have truly enriched this seminar. Thank you for making this annual seminar a resounding success. As you know now, WavEC is celebrating the 20th anniversary. And when I think in our organization and leading an organization, I believe that the greatest difficulty is to some extent trying to decode the future and define strategies accordingly. And this is basically what WavEC did 20 years ago. Unfortunately, I cannot say much about the route, so I asked António Sarmento, the former CEO, to share a few thoughts about this journey of these 20 years. And right after that, I would like to invite you all to join in a small celebration in the lounge right here next to the exit of this conference room. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. First, I would like to say that after me, António Vidigal will say a few words. Mark just forgot it because he was a bit nervous. So I want to start by saying that this is an interesting coincidence. We are celebrating the 20th anniversary with the Dutch Embassy. And indeed, the first two people that suggest me to create WavEC were Dutchmen, Hans van Breugel and Fred Gardner from Teamwork Technology, a company that was developing at the time the AWS, the Archimedes Wave Swing, with whom I worked for many years, and that eventually tested their device here in Portugal, in the north. Indeed, they were responsible for setting the infrastructure that allowed later on Pelamis to be tested and the wind float to be tested. And I have to say that initially I was very scared about this initiative because I thought that I could not raise the sufficient support, including financial support. And so I decided to invest 3 years of my life in this project and then figure out whether I should continue with the project or not. But reality, indeed, was much better than what my initial expectations. So very clear, after 2 years, it was clear to me that WavEC should continue. And I want to present you my thoughts on why this success was achieved with in a relatively simple way. I think the first one was the staff quality and dedication. So I thank very much all my colleagues, present and previous colleagues, on their effort to set up and develop WavEC. And secondly, the engagement of WavEC board members and WavEC associates, because WavEC is formally an association of companies. But the third point was also very, very important, because when I set up WavEC, I had 25 years of experience in this sector as an academic, integrated in a research group on wave energy, led by Professor António Falcão, who was my PhD supervisor at Instituto Superior Técnico, the Lisbon Engineering School of Lisbon University. And finally, a fourth very important factor was the availability of European research funds, because the amount of research funds that we have in Portugal, and that we had in particular in those times in Portugal, was very small. So the European research funding was extremely important for us to develop. And of course also the confidence that over 200 partners and 60 clients had put on us. So looking back to these 20 years of WavEC activity, it is clear a very positive balance of our activity and impact. First, because of the significant contribution that I believe we did for the development, integration and development of wave energy and even more offshore wind. Secondly, because we were able to attract more than 70 European funded projects to Portugal with a wider impact. Also because we trained dozens of young researchers, most of them still active in the industry, and 7 of them creating their own companies active in this sector. So now 20 years have passed, and I don't know why I became older. And with that, the need to pass my responsibilities as CEO and president of the board to the young generation. And this happened exactly 1 year ago. I'm still involved as an advisor to the board, but luckily for me, my life is now much simpler. So to me, leaving the responsibilities of WavEC, it is most rewarding to see that after 20 years, WavEC is still a very innovative organization with a very promising future and a very motivated, qualified, and professional team that are led by two people in whom I have the utmost confidence, Mark Alves as CEO and Ana Britimelo as COO. I believe that they will, together with my other colleagues, will lead WavEC in the next 20 years with a lot of future. So to conclude, I wish a long life to WavEC, and I wish to renovate my deepest gratitude to those that contributed for making my passage through WavEC as one of the most rewarding chapters of my life. Thank you very much. And now, I ask António Vidigal to talk. Thank you.
I am going to be very brief. I'm very well aware that I am the last barrier towards the drinks and the cake. But what I would like to say is the following. The WavEC Seminar 2023 has been, as usual, a remarkable event. It had to be. It was a 20 years anniversary event. This year, it holds even a greater significance as we pay tribute to a WavEC founding figure, Professor António Sarmento. It is an immense honor for me to share a few words about the professor. I deeply admire Professor Sarmento, and I am privileged to count myself as his close friend. I've been following WavEC since its inception. Initially focusing on wave energy and later expanding into offshore wind. Thanks to Professor Sarmento and his team, expertise and dedication, Portugal has secured a leading position in ocean energy. In the area of wave energy, Professor António Sarmento pioneered with the Pico wave plant, which commenced the operations long ago in 1999. Utilizing at the time an oscillating water column, and it had a power of 400 kilowatts. It was already quite large for the time. Subsequently, advancements like AWS and Pelamis emerged. Presently, Core Power is testing a promising device that incorporates extensive knowledge acquired over time. This year's conference centers around offshore wind. And in Portugal, floating offshore wind technology takes precedence. Portugal spearheads this technology with the WindFloat project. This achievement owes much to Professor Sarmento. He identified the technology and presented it to EDP when it was merely a concept proposed by Professors Dominique Rodier and Christian Sermelli. Professor followed the construction of the prototype and made relevant contributions. The prototype, WindFloat 1, commenced operations in 2011 with a 2 megawatt wind turbine, the largest at the time. It withstood extreme weather conditions, enduring waves exceeding 17 meters in height and winds surpassing 40 meters per second. It generated 17 gigawatt hours before being deployed to Kincardine project. As usual, many people in Portugal had said that the project would never succeed. Now everyone takes it for granted. With WindFloat 1, all the doubts you could have about the viability of the technology disappeared. WindFloat Atlantic followed and started operation in 2019. The wind farm has 25 megawatts and has worked like clockwork. Our discussions today about constructing gigawatts of offshore wind in Portugal are only possible due to Professor Sarmento and unparalleled contributions. Professor Sarmento has a profound love for the sea and sailing. We have sailed together a couple of times in the Berlenga offshore regatta, which is the Portuguese fastnet and can become very rough, in fact. Professor's current sailing boat is named Horizon 90, reflecting his intent to sail her until he reaches 90 years of age. We all assume that Professor António Sarmento will continue to influence the development of offshore technologies well beyond his 90s. I'd like to be around. Thank you immensely, António Sarmento, for your invaluable contributions. Please join me in the round of applauses.